The greatest era-adjusted power speed player in Major League Baseball history is not in the Hall of Fame. I'm not okay with that. Diamond Clear Media presents the quest to get Harry Stovey in the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame. Harry Stovey was a Major League Baseball pioneer who put up big numbers in the 1880s. You should look him up for yourself. My sons and I embarked on a 4-day epic road trip to the Philadelphia Sports Hall of Fame and various locations around Massachusetts, including Fenway Park and the graveside of Harry Stovey, where I delivered a speech on Facebook Live that will conclude this documentary and where we present the case for Harry Stovey. Harry Stovey. You'll hear his name around. 4 days after we returned from our trip, he got this mention during a Braves-Angels game.
So there are only 3 players ever that have led Major League Baseball in homers and triples, which he's on pace to do right now. In 1880, Harry Stovey did it.
Larry.
Yeah. 1955, some guy named Willie Mays, and then in 78, Jim Rice. But Ohtani could become the 4th.
How many home runs did Harry have back in 1880?
Harry Stovey?
Yeah.
He had 14 triples and 6 homers. Things were different back then.
Okay, great stat by the guys in the truck, but how do they leave out that he's the only player in MLB history to do it twice? I mean, come on!
Harry Stovey. Guy will always remember.
100%.
One more nugget on our friend Harry Stovey. He was a rookie in 1880. They played only 85 games, so cut him some slack on the 6 homers. He was playing for the Worcester Ruby Legs. Wow. Standing room only.
Packed house.
Less than a week before that, we set out to commemorate the man. We left Knoxville, Tennessee, heading 650 miles to Philadelphia. Harry Stovey played much of his career in what was known as the circus uniform era. These aren't exactly replica unis, but maybe in the spirit of uniforms. Uniforms of that time frame had a city or a logo, rarely both. Players' names didn't become a thing until the TV era in 1960, as fans wouldn't be able to read the names from the stands anyway. But this project is pretty specific, so we decided to include his last name. Stovey didn't have a number because numbers didn't arrive until 1929. Crests and logos on the shoulder were my idea. My friend Jessica Perry created these beauties for me. It defies logic that Harry Stovey has become an underdog story, but since history has painted it that way, and since we were in Philly, we decided to stop by the Museum of Art and the Rocky statue. When in Rome.
Go. Let's go. What do you got?
The things you have to do to get around the Facebook and YouTube copyright Nazis.
Get him. Hey, don't go. Points to that. Fight. Get inside. There you go. All right. Stay in the camera, fool. No. I need one more round.
From there, we visited the Philadelphia Sports Hall of Fame, which is now housed in a fantastic trophy shop called Spike's Trophies. They do national and international business, so check them out as you have need. The Philadelphia Sports Hall of Fame lost its building, and Spike's stepped up to house all the memorabilia. And while we're on topic, someone needs to develop a building endowment, so contact everyone you know that might be interested. We sat down with the proprietor of Spikes, Keith Baldwin, to discuss Harry Stovey's merits for inclusion in the MLB Hall of Fame, or more immediately, the Philadelphia Sports Hall of Fame.
Hey, Keith. I'm John Kaufman.
Hi, John Kaufman.
Nice
I'm
to
Keith
meet
Baldwin.
you, Keith. Yeah, thanks for showing us around. There is a baseball player who was born in Philadelphia. He played 7 years of Major League Baseball here in Philadelphia. In his 14 Major League seasons, he led the league in home runs 5 times. That's more times than Jimmy Fox, Reggie Jackson, Mark McGwire, other notable.
Jimmy Fox and Reggie Jackson are in
the Hall of Fame.
because Reggie Jackson was born here.
Yes. He also stole 500 bases in the major leagues. That's tied for 35th all time. He is 21st in triples in Major League Baseball history. He hasn't been passed since Stan Musial did it, so he'll probably be 21st for all of eternity. He was the first Major League player to hit 10 home runs in a season. He was the first player to hit 50 home runs in a career. He was the first player to hit 100 home runs in a career. Would you have a guess who might have been the first to hit 150? It's an easy answer.
But, I was focused. I was
Okay.
listening to your question. I'm focused on, it's got to be your great-grandfather or grandfather who played for the A's.
He's not related to me at all.
All right.
But we do have a vested interest here. We'll be heading to his grave tomorrow in New Bedford, Massachusetts. His name is Harry Stovey.
I don't know him.
He was an early baseball pioneer. Harry Stovey is not in the Philadelphia Sports Hall of Fame.
Should he be?
He should be. He was born here. He played here, led the league in home runs 5 times, led the league in stolen bases. He's actually
I'm going to give you my email address. And
Yes.
You're going to send me this information,
I
which I'm
will.
going to pass to Ken Avalon,
Yes.
the head of the Philadelphia Sports Hall of Fame. And I got a strange feeling that he may end up being in.
I should hope so. We're on a quest to get him in the MLB Hall of Fame. I think he's the most overlooked player of any of the major sports. It's the greatest snub that he's not in the MLB Hall of Fame.
So how did you become interested in this person?
So there's a game called Earl Weaver Baseball. It's a computer baseball simulation game. Getting into the Hall of Fame. He's in the conversation every year with the Veterans Committee, but I'm going to email you all this information. And Harry Stovey, at a minimum, I think, maybe we should get him in the Philadelphia
I think
Sports
you have a very good opportunity to do that. Pretty cool, eh?
I think we had at least convinced Mr. Baldwin by the time we left. Our next stop was the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame, just to make sure that Harry Stovey was indeed the worst snub of all of the major halls of fame. We saw a galaxy of greats, and we confirmed Tom Chambers, Detlef Schrempf, Bob Dandridge, they've got nothing on Stovey. Stovey is a swish. Take that to the bank. He's a slam dunk. And by then we were all out of metaphors. We hit up Plymouth Rock to remember that we might all be playing cricket in Europe if not for some brave pilgrims. And then we went to the Boston Harbor to consider there probably wouldn't be West Coast teams if not for those brave revolutionaries. We ended up at Fenway Park to see the Braves Red Sox, which gets me back to Stovey. You see that team out there in the road grays? Harry Stovey piloted that very franchise to a championship in this very city about 20 years before there was a green monster. The Braves are one of the MLB's original franchises, finishing second in the National Association in baseball's inaugural year, 1871, Behind Hall of Famers and founders George and Harry Wright, who'd come from a baseball club in Cincinnati known as the Red Stockings, they had played in no league. They did barnstorming tours. They brought in pitcher Al Spalding, later a Hall of Famer, but also the founder of the Spalding Sporting Goods Company. These Braves were known as the Boston Red Stockings. Fun fact, in early baseball, teams often wore the same color wool jerseys, generally gray, and were differentiated only by the color of their socks. That's why so many teams have been named after socks or stockings historically. A second influence is that those old wool pants were very hot, so players preferred knickers with socks exposed and prominent. So the National Association folded mainly because the Red Stockings were so dominant, winning 4 of its 5 championships. The franchise was then a charter member of the National League in 1876, and these Braves are the longest-running continuous baseball franchise, with only the Chicago Cubs being as old, but having taken a couple of years off after the Chicago Fire. In the NL, Boston came to be known as the Red Caps, as the Cincinnati Reds team was often referred to as the Red Stockings, a carryover from the George and Harry Wright Cincinnati days. Our Red Caps became the Bean Eaters for 24 years, including the year Stovey took them to championship heights, several other team names until these Braves became the Boston Braves. Then they moved to Milwaukee in 1954, and finally to Atlanta in 1966, where they became my favorite team. I guess they moved one more time to Marietta if we're splitting hairs. When Boston founded an American League franchise, they recycled the idea of the Sox moniker and came to call Fenway home more than 100 years before they donned these yellow monstrosities that insult baseball historians that might have driven 1,000 miles to see the Red Sox. On this night, Ronald Acuna Jr. continued to carve out his place in the power speed discussion as he went 0 for 4 but did manage to steal 2 bases. By the time you watch this film, he may have become MLB's first 30-60 man, which is very impressive in its own right. But let me take you back to that morning when we visited the graveside of Mr. Harry Stovey. On our way to New Bedford, we had had some bouquets arranged at Touch of Grace Florist in Dartmouth, Massachusetts, and then we were over to Oak Grove Cemetery in New Bedford, where after about a 20-minute search, we found the grave of Harry Stovey. I hope you enjoy the speech. Good afternoon, and welcome digitally to the graveside of Mr. Harry Duffield Stowe, who changed his name professionally to Harry Stovey to hide his stellar baseball career from his mother, who viewed the sport as dishonorable. I've come to believe, and I hope that you will also, that Harry Stovey's Hall of Fame omission is the most egregious mistake by any of the major halls of fame. And my sons and I have traveled 1,100 miles in a 15-hour car ride to commemorate and to raise awareness of the Hall of Fame case for Harry Stovey. I'd like to first thank my best friend Mick Dearstone, who inspired me to take a deep dive into baseball history. I want to thank Secret City Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram for providing the dollar down vehicle that we drove here in, and also supporting my other streaming pursuits. And then I want to thank my wife Jessica, whose birthday is tomorrow. Happy birthday, honey. We'll be speeding back after we see the Braves Red Sox at Fenway tonight to enjoy a birthday dinner with her. Harry Stovey is the premier power speed player in baseball history. He led his league in home runs 5 times. You're going to hear me say that a bunch today. He stole 500 bases, probably more like 800, as we'll discuss. But before we get to that, I'll tell you how I discovered him. In October 1991, it was made known to me that I would be getting the baseball game Earl Weaver Baseball and an Amiga computer for Christmas. So I took the baseball encyclopedia and I looked up every player who ever played the game individually in these here pages. If they were any good at baseball, I put their name in notebooks. I made some cuts and made some all-time all-star teams. Over thousands of games, we grew our league to 64 teams, 1,750 players.
We used double-sided or 32-sided dice to assign players to teams.
And it gave me an opportunity to get unusually acclimated into baseball history. Sid Bream was our Mendoza line, by the way. If you were better than Sid Bream, then you were on the game.
The game allows you to put in selective attributes in addition to raw stats. So on a steal of second, a player's stolen bases and a stolen base percentage might control whether he was out or safe on a bang-bang play, but his running speed would control his absolute speed.
Same thing with power, and that would allow you to kind of adjust the eras in power. You could punish Brady Anderson, you could reward Home Run Baker by giving them more or less power based on how they performed in their era. And that research led me to Harry Stovey.
A speed power player is invaluable in any context, but try as I might, I could not find any justification on his half-page entry in this baseball encyclopedia not to give him a 10 in both speed and power. I'll tell you a little bit about how rare that is.
So Stovey is a 10-10. Willie Mays is a 10-8. Ricky Henderson is a 6-10. Barry Bonds was a 7-8, but he got edited up to a 10-8 after his power surge. Bonds and Mays are the only 10-8 players on the game. There is no 10-9 or 9-10 player. Harry Stovey has a full classification between him and the next group of guys. The 7-10s were Ty Cobb was a 7-10. Mickey Mantle was a 10-7. We gave him credit for his pre-osteomyelitis Sloan speed. The 16-point players were Hank Aaron, Ken Griffey Jr., A-Rod, Sammy Sosa, Jackie Robinson, Eric Davis, and Oscar Charleston. And then the 15-point players were Lou Gehrig, Jose Canseco, Honus Wagner, Ernie Banks, Mel Ott, Tris Speaker, Frank Robinson, Jeff Bagwell, Joe Morgan, Ryan Sandberg, Dale Murphy, Darryl Strawberry, Ed Delahanty, Hugh Duffy, Bo Jackson, and Bobby Bonds. Those are the top 30 or so speed power players, at least up until about 2000, in all of baseball. Out of 23,000 guys to have ever played the game, Harry Stovey is the only 10-10 in the speed power metric. A little bit of a deep dive into his statistics. First, I'm going to start by making the case against the subject, Harry Stovey. Elements his detractors would point to. He only played 14 seasons. He only really had 12 great seasons. He played 7 of them in the American Association, which was considered to be an inferior league at the time. And his batting average was 40 points lower in the National League than in the Association, where he played about half of his career. His WAR, which is wins above replacement, kind of a modern stat, is a little bit lower than other players, left fielders, let's say, in the Hall of Fame.
Insert. For balance, I've included a list of Hall of Famers with a lower WAR than Harry Stovey. There are currently 32 of them, and this excludes relievers who typically have a lower WAR.
His batting average was a touch low, generally at .289. But that stat's become less important of late.
But the case for Harry Stovey is much, much stronger. Some intangibles.
He invented the feet-first pop-up slide. He was either the inventor or the first player to ever wear sliding pants. This gentleman here. He was twice appointed player manager of his team. And he won a championship in each of the 3 major leagues in which he played, the National League, the Players League, which was only around 1 year, and the American Association. That'd be similar to winning 3 World Series today, or maybe 3 ALCSs if you didn't know whether a World Series was going to be played. On defense, he was an above-average defender. He had a lot of speed, obviously. Still ranks in the top 100 all-time in outfield assists, despite playing a third of his career at first base. Got several top 5 finishes in range factor, putouts, assists, and fielding percentage in both the outfield and at first base, so his defense is not what's keeping him out of Cooperstown. But the offense is where Harry Stovey shined.
He was the first Major League Baseball player to hit 10 home runs in a season. He was the first player to hit 50 home runs in a career. He was also the first player to hit 100 home runs in a career. Do you know who was first to 150? That was Babe Ruth 31 years after Stovey retired. When Ruth ascended to becoming the career leader in home runs, Harry Stovey was still ranked third all-time, despite having been retired for 30 years.
To recap, there are only 3 men who have hit a 50 home run career plateau in Major League Baseball. Hank Aaron was the first to 750. Babe Ruth was the first to 700, all the way down to 150. Harry Stovey was the first to both 50 and 100. Some nice company there, Ruth, Aaron, and Stovey. There are 8 men who have been the career leader in home runs since the 1871 start of baseball as a baseline. Stovey ranks 6th all-time in time spent as the career home run leader, with Ruth having held the designation for 52 years, Aaron for 33, Roger Connor had it for 21, Bonds is at 17 and counting, Lip Pike, who hit 4 to lead the league in the original season of baseball, he had 21 for his career, but he was the career home run champ for a total of 8 years. Harry Stovey held it for a little over 7. The others are Charlie Jones, who had it approximately 4 years, he and Stovey being the only 2 people to have been overtaken and then recapture the home run champ.
Dan Brothers had it for 2 years, Jim O'Rourke for 1. That's everyone who has ever been the Major League career home run leader. That's a list of 8 men, 5 Hall of Famers, plus the original leader Pike, current leader Barry Bonds, and Harry Stovey.
Now, single-season home run champ. On that progressive list, there are 9 guys working back from Bonds, McGuire, Maris, Ruth, and then the next back was Ned Williamson of the 1884 Chicago White Stockings. He had 27. The one year that they decided that balls hit over the short porch at Lakeshore Park would be considered home runs, not doubles, as they had been every other year. Cap Anson had decided to count them as homers in 1884. House rules on that one. The fences were just 186 feet down the line. My 12-year-old has hit a deeper bomb than 186 feet to win a championship in middle school with a walk-off. To give.
Well hit, center field, deep, headed back. It is gone. Hardin Valley wins the Futures Championship on a 2-2 home run by Aaron Kaufman.
So that 186 feet was a short porch indeed.
Ned Williamson only hit 2 of his 27 home runs on the road that year. 4 White Stockings players hit at least 20. Anson was one. It was his only 20-homer year. 225 homers were hit at this park. Sorry to belabor it. In that season, and only 124 were hit in the National League the entire previous year.
But if you remove the 186-foot fence outliers, no one would have broken Harry Stovey's single-season record of 14, which he had set the previous season, for 4 years. And that would, in fact, have been longer than Mark McGuire held the single-season record. Ned Williamson gets a 3 in power on Earl Weaver baseball, by the way. But ultimately, Harry Stovey sets just 5 spots behind Bonds in the progression of single-season home run kings, robbed of a multi-year reign by a 186-foot fence on a list of 9 guys.
Triples are a little bit less of a glamour stat now that they're a lot more rare. They aren't closely monitored, since Owen Wilson somehow hit 36 of them in 1912. But they were a premier power metric in the day of Stovey. Shohei Ohtani led the league with 8 last season. But did you know who the first player to ever hit 20 triples in a season was? It was Harry Stovey, first to ever hit 20 triples in a season.
He ranks 21st all-time in triples and hasn't been passed since Stan Musial did it in 1963. So he'll probably be 21st in triples for all of eternity.
Talking about speed, an astute historian might ask, didn't they hit a lot of inside-the-park home runs back then? How much power did he really have? Is he just a speed guy? It's a fair question. Stovey's tied for 15th all-time with 27 inside-the-park home runs. He's got 95 of the fence-clearing variety.
But on the inside-the-park top 20 list, only Rogers Hornsby has a greater percentage of career home runs that actually cleared fences. Incidentally, the further back you go, the more likely that an inside-the-park homer was a really deep bomb. Some of those fields had 600 feet of outfield back there.
Sometimes you just hit it over their head and ran around the bases.
But Stovey was the premier power hitter of his generation, both home runs and triples, and he also stole 500 bases. Harry Stovey ranks 5th all-time in stolen bases per game played, and he's currently 35th in steals in the history of the sport, tied with Ichiro Suzuki, having stolen more than Louis Aparicio, Carl Crawford, Roberto Alomar, Willie Keeler, Delino DeShields, Bobby Bonds, Tris Speaker, others. But here's the kicker. They did not keep track of stolen bases for the first 6 years that Harry Stovey played. They took a hiatus on keeping track of swipes from 1876 to 1885. He broke in the middle of that. The first year that they did again keep track of steals, it was interesting, some crazy anomalies. They actually gave players credit for a steal when moving from first to third on a single and similar. So Stovey was credited with 156 stolen bases as he hung up his cleats in the 1886 offseason. He held both the career and single-season steal highs. Baseball stat revisionists eventually combed the record books and applied today's stolen base methodology to the scoring principles of the 1886 box scores, and I wish they'd do the same with Ned Williamson's home runs. But until then, they combed Stovey's steals back to 68, which was still good for first in the league and first all-time. Hugh Nickel stole 138 bases the next year, and his record was never seriously challenged until Ricky Henderson did it once with 130. If you're following that, though, Ricky Henderson was never the single-season steals champion, but Harry Stovey was. If we do some math and take everyone's 5-year steals per game percentage in the next 5 years once they started keeping track of steals, and we add those steals per game up against the games played in the dark steals era, that would give Harry another 333 stolen bases, pushing him up to 5th all-time with 842. While applying that math to everyone else, 2 people do pass him, so that puts him at a legitimate 7th all-time in projected steals if we take a look at the dark steals era and include that. Ultimately, he's within a couple of standard deviations, or one standard deviation actually, of the all-time steals lead up to Brock. So it's possible if he stole more bases from ages 23 to 28 than he did from 29 to 32, it might have been his record that Lou Brock was chasing, or even that Ricky Henderson was. He could have been possibly the stolen base champion for 80 or 100 years, but we'll never know. If you're following me here, Harry Stovey was at various times in his life the single-season home run record holder, the career home run record holder, the single-season triples record holder, the single-season stolen base record holder, and the career stolen base record holder. That's a lot of speed and power. Using the stat totals as the record books currently stand, there's a couple of interesting cases here. Stovey is one of 9 players to steal 70 bases 3 times. Names like Henderson, Raines, Coleman, and Stovey. He also led his league in runs 4 times and is one of 3 players with a minimum of 1,000 games who averaged more than 1 run per game. Hall of Famer Billy Hamilton and George Gore being the other 2. Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig are tied for 4th and 5th on that list with .87 runs scored per game in MLB history. So that's decent company.
Insert. Here's a chronological list of players who led the league in runs 3 straight seasons. You can see that Stovey was the first to do this, and this list includes only Hall of Famers plus future Hall of Famers Pujols and Trout, Pete Rose, and Harry Stovey.
When you take a look at the 20 guys that have stolen 90 bases in a season, the home run finishes of those gentlemen, with Stovey, you've got the 5 home run titles I've been talking about, but he also had 3 second-place finishes, a 3rd, a 4th, a 7th, and a 15th. Taking the rest of the 90 stolen base field, Ty Cobb led the league in homers once. He had 3 second places and a 3rd place finish. Tom Browning has a 3rd place. Tom stole 103 in 1885, but he never had more than 40 in any other season than that. Lou Brock had a 4th place home run finish in 67. Hall of Famer Charlie Comiskey, who had a field named after him. He stole 117 in 1888 and finished 5th in home runs. 1887, finished 5th in home runs in 88. Rickey Henderson had a 6th place finish with 28 in 1991. Rickey's next highest finish was 16th. And then Tom Brown finished 7th in homers in 1887. Jim Fogarty 14th in 1887. So in home run finishes, Harry Stovey outperforms the entire field of the 90 stolen bases in a season club. And if you took away his 5 home run titles, he's arguably still a better power finisher than that entire list of 19 players.
Insert. When I discovered Harry Stovey in 1991, he actually had 6 home run titles. Sometime during my adulthood, baseball historians discovered an additional home run by Bid McPhee in 1886, giving Bid sole possession of that crown and relegating Stovey to a second-place finish. Bid was the last bare-handed player, favoring his hands when every other Major League player donned a glove. Bid was elected to the Hall of Fame in 2000, and perhaps this extra home run is what put him over the top. But when I uncovered Harry Stovey, only Ruth, Kiner, and Schmidt had more home run titles. He was an amazing find among my friends who knew of some 1800s players, but had also never heard of the guy who had 6 home run crowns to his credit.
The only people to lead the league in home runs more times than Stovey were Babe Ruth, Mike Schmidt, Ralph Kiner, Gabby Cravath, Harmon Killebrew, and Mel Ott. Who are some power hitters that never led the league in home runs 5 times like Stovey did? Jimmy Fox, Hank Greenberg, Mickey Mantle, Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, Reggie Jackson, Mark McGuire, Ken Griffey Jr., Johnny Mize, Hack Wilson, Willie McCovey, Jim Rice, Home Run Baker. Anyone in the modern era? How many stolen bases were those guys getting? Not a lot of overlap on the Venn diagram between Ruth, Killebrew, Schmidt, McGuire, those guys, and then Cobb, Henderson, Coleman, Brock, and Raines, except Stovey. He's done it more times than every other power hitter you've ever heard of. There's a sabermetric called the black ink test, which gives you credit for various offensive categories you lead the league in. Harry Stovey's black ink number is 56, with the average Hall of Famer clocking in at 27. So he's more than doubling the average of Hall of Famers with black ink. He ranks 28th all-time in black ink by a batter, ahead of Carl Yastrzemski, Rickey Henderson, Johnny Mize, Mel Ott, Harmon Killebrew, Hank Greenberg, Albert Pujols. He's just a couple points behind Jimmy Fox, 1 point behind Tony Gwynn and Willie Mays, just 6 points behind Mickey Mantle. Gray ink calculates your top 10 finishes, and Harry Stovey had gray ink 210 times, with the average Hall of Famer coming in at 144, so he's 50% higher than the average enshrined, with significant leads over George Sisler, Eddie Matthews, Ernie Banks, Jim Rice, Reggie Jackson, Duke Snyder, Ken Griffey Jr. Stovey was all over the top of the league in everything but batting average, although he did hit 304 times. He had 1 batting title, according to this book right here, but baseball historians came in and revised the requirements from at-bats to plate appearances, and he lost his batting title. So he had 1 batting title when he died. Sorry, man. But that was taken away with some stat revisions. 6 Major League players have led the league in home runs and stolen an accredited 500 bases in their career. 3 of those 6 players had 500 steals and 1 home run crown. Those are Ty Cobb, Herman Long, who hit 12 homers in 1900, and Bid McPhee, who led the league with 8 in 1886, but he had 0 the previous year, 53 for his 18-year career. He was a defensive stalwart, the first American Association player to be elected to the Hall of Fame, so hopefully that kind of broke the glass ceiling on that. But those are the guys who had 500 steals and 1 home run crown. 2 men have stolen 500 bases and led the league twice in home runs. That's Hugh Duffy, who batted .440 in 1894, and also Barry Bonds has 2 home run crowns and 500 stolen bases. Harry Stovey, again, had 500 steals that we can prove, and not 3 home run crowns, which would be better than these other 5 players, not 4, but 5 home run crowns for Harry Stovey. In the inaugural Hall of Fame voting in 1936, when the sports concept was kind of brand new for Halls of Fame, Stovey had been retired for 43 years. He received 6 votes from the Veterans Committee. He got more than future Hall of Famers from the 1800s. John Clarkson, Al Spalding, who once won 40 games and then quit to make his sporting goods company. We just mentioned Hugh Duffy. Stovey got more than Kid Nichols, Monty Ward, Billy Hamilton, Dan Brothers, Jesse Burkett, Bobby Wallace, Deacon White, Jake Beckley, Tim Keefe, Tommy McCarthy, and Candy Cummings, who may have invented the curveball. All of those guys are in, even though Stovey got more votes than them in 1936. But why have we forgotten Harry Stovey? I want to conclude by addressing his alleged deficiencies. I'm convinced that this speed power pioneer right here did enough to get in the Hall of Fame. His WAR's a little low, but he's one of the premier base stealers of all time, and he got no credit for stolen bases for his first 6 years. They say the American Association is a little weak. That supposedly counterfeited some of his numbers. But the Cincinnati Reds jumped from the AA to the NL in 1889. They won exactly one more game in the National League than they won in the American Association with pretty much the exact same team. So this was back-to-back years, kind of apples to apples. The leagues played 7 World Series against each other in that day. The association was 1-4-2. I don't know how you get 2 ties in a World Series, but it's hard to argue to me that a league is inferior if they won or tied 3 out of 7. I took a look at all the Hall of Famers that spent time in the American Association. Out of 4,000 at-bats, and boy, this would have been a nightmare to calculate with this book right here. Yeah, but thank goodness for Excel and BaseballReference.com. But out of 4,000 at-bats from players from the American Association, they batted a cumulative .275 in the American Association. Taking a look at players from the other major leagues, those same players, and this isn't apples to apples, obviously. You know, some of these guys played all the way till 1909. Some of them were elected as managers or executives, so this isn't a true perfect stat, I guess. But between National League, American League, Players League, which was only open that 1 year, and a couple of seasons from the National Association, which predated all other baseball leagues, the Hall of Famers that batted .275 in the American Association batted a collective .316 and 16,000 at-bats in these other leagues, 31 points higher than they batted in the association. Continuing that thought line, at-bats per double were 6 at-bats higher in the American Association, so doubles were more rare. 3 more at-bats per triple in the association on that accumulation that I tabulated. And at-bats per home run goes from 112 up to 146 in the association. So by that math, if Harry Stovey had played in the National League the entire time, maybe he would have hit 25% more home runs, because it was actually harder to hit one in the association by those Hall of Fame stats. I think the sports writers were just sucking up to the league that already existed at the time these discussions were being had, like the National League trying to suck up and get better seats at the Dodgers-Giants game in the press box or whatever. Stovey led the National League in home runs and triples in his rookie season. He stayed in the NL for a couple of years. He jumped to the American Association, to a team in his hometown. He played in that league 7 of its 10 years, and he set the records for home runs and runs in the association, and was in the top 10 in every offensive category. Jumped to the Players League in 1890. This was the premier league at the time. They stole all-stars from both the NL and the AA. There he finished 3rd in home runs and led the league in stolen bases, leading his team to a championship, outshining future Hall of Famers Mike King Kelly and old Hoss Radburn on his team. Dan Brothers may or may not have had a better year. They both did really well. Then he returned to the National League in 1891, again led the National League in home runs, guided his team to another championship where he was clearly the most productive hitter on that Boston Bean Eater team. He's just simply the best era-adjusted speed power player that ever played. Imagine for a second that Lou Brock and Maury Wills, Ricky Henderson and Vince Coleman were attacking the home run records of Babe Ruth, Roger Maris, Hank Aaron, and Barry Bonds. That's what Harry Stovey was doing to the major leagues in the 1800s. He's, in my view, a first-ballot Hall of Famer. He did things first, He did things extraordinarily. He did things that no one has ever done. It's way time to get him in the Hall of Fame, way overdue. He's probably more deserving than half of Hall of Famers if you really understand his entire body of work. I'm not trying to kick anyone out, though. I'm just trying to get this one in. Every day that Harry Stovey remains unenshrined, it amplifies the mistakes that so many stakeholders have made throughout Major League Baseball history on this Hall of Fame voting. So I'm calling on the Hall of Fame Early Days Committee to finally do what's right and elect Harry Stovey to the Hall of Fame. I'm calling on you, my viewers, to get behind this concept and help generate the notoriety that Harry needs from this egregious omission. Here's to you, Mr. Stowe. May we meet on the other side in a place where your absence from the Hall of Fame, be it 100 years or whatever, will seem like a grain of sand. I really hope you get there. Rest in peace, sir, and thank you so much for the inspiration that you've inspired myself and my family. And thank you guys for watching. I appreciate you joining me at the graveside of Mr. Harry Stovey. Let's get him in the Hall of Fame. It's long overdue.